Alex Karp. How to sum him up? Okay, he's a very strange figure to be in charge of this valuable software company. A very controversial company, one of the most valuable software companies in the world, right? And Palantir is right at the centre of the United States kill chain.
Palantir boss Alex Karp has told Silicon Valley to stop making distractions and start helping the West win wars. His company's software is already deep inside the British state, and this is why. Hi everyone, we are continuing our summer series taking a look at some of the bigger names in tech that you might not have heard of. And this one is a little different. Some know him as the world's scariest CEO. Alex Karp runs Palantir. Its software takes data scattered across different systems, joins it up, and helps organisations decide what to do with it. Now that might mean managing an NHS waiting list, helping immigration identify people for deportation. It could also mean finding and striking targets on a battlefield. Earlier this year, Palantir published a 22-point manifesto setting out Karp's vision for the West. So what does he actually believe in? And why has Britain placed so much trust in his tech? Rowland Manthorpe is Sky's technology correspondent. Rowland, he's an interesting figure, this Alex Karp. I mean, for those who haven't come across him, who exactly is he? Because he's not your standard tech bro.
Oh, no, not at all. Alex Karp. How to sum him up? Okay, Alex Karp is the CEO of Palantir, which a very controversial company, one of the most valuable software companies in the world, right? But he's a very strange figure to be in charge of this valuable software company, which is generally associated with the right of politics. That's how it's become associated over time. Because he grew up in a very left-wing progressive family. Mm-hmm. And, even fairly recently was describing himself as a socialist. He has no computer science background and quite a limited business background. And the main thing he did before he became a CEO was study philosophy and social theory. And that is just one of many Karpisms. So I hope I've given you a flavour of the guy, a very unusual person to be in this position.
Okay, so let's talk about Palantir then.
Yeah.
He doesn't come from a background in tech. So how on earth does he become a billionaire? What is this company? What exactly does it do?
Palantir makes software that help organisations, private and public, but kind of famously public organisations like the armed forces in the US, knit their data together. But the funny thing is that is a really inadequate explanation of what Palantir do, because there are loads of companies that do that. Palantir is also a one-stop shop for any organisation that is struggling to get a grip of their data. And just to give you kind of one example of what this means. So Palantir pioneered this thing that people thought was laughable at the time, called forward deployed engineers, where they would send very smart young software engineers into organisations and embed them there to work out what they needed. And they weren't being paid by the hour, they were being paid by results.
Right.
So I've met a Palantir engineer who worked on this in the NHS, spent weeks, months at Chelsea and Westminster Hospital, following doctors around and building tools specifically to help them. They were trying to understand their problems and then build those tools.
So is this sort of like management consultancy in the age of artificial intelligence?
I think that's actually a really good way of putting it. But whereas the management consultants, they'll come in, but they don't really understand the tech.
Exactly.
And the tech companies will have got all the tech, but they're not going to tell you how to use it. Palantir do everything. And of course, we're going to talk about the NHS and everything. This is kind of why they're so attractive to organisations that are really struggling to get a handle on their data.
So attractive to organisations, deeply, deeply worrying to certain individuals and other organisations. And I don't understand that. Why would an ability to bring together different pots of data make Palantir, on the one hand, incredibly valuable, but in its critics' eyes, incredibly frightening?
I guess it's because of who Palantir's working for. So it's working for the Department of Defense in the US, the intelligence services. It's worked with the Israelis, the Ukrainians. These are people that people understandably worry about them getting more power. What will they do if they truly get a handle on their data? And of course, Palantir itself is named after the Seeing Stone in Lord of the Rings. There's a slightly ominous aspect to that, right?
Yeah, that wasn't a tool of the good guys, was it?
Well, how long do you have? I mean, very interesting question. I'll spare exactly. Yeah, don't get into Tolkien with a nerd, but no, I guess basically it's that people are worried about these organisations being given more power, but also is that I think it goes back to Karp. Mm-hmm. Karp says things that make people concerned because this is an organisation that has an ideological position. And so in a way, whereas a lot of organisations, Microsoft, for instance, Microsoft work with all the people that Palantir work with. Microsoft are as deeply embedded in many ways as Palantir, but Microsoft, they make it boring. Palantir, they make it interesting and they kind of raise these questions of what would you really do if you had this power?
Interesting, but also concerning. I mean, we have it written down, in fact, the kind of the ethos, the ideology, the 22-point manifesto that was penned by him. Just first and foremost, just explain exactly what the manifesto is.
It's a summary of a book that Karp wrote, co-authored, called The Technological Republic. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a statement of his theses that really he's been saying for years and years and years, ever since he became Palantir CEO in, I think, 2003 or 2004. And it's 22 points. I mean, it's kind of long. I honestly could do with a bit of editing. But I guess there are basically kind of three key points. The first is about hard power. He's saying, look, in Silicon Valley, it's not enough for us just to build apps. We need to build weapons too. He's also talking to people in the Valley, talking to this elite and saying we need to do useful things. We have a civilizational duty. Mm-hmm. And then lastly, and I guess most controversially, or this is what really puts the wind up people, is that he's calling for a kind of civilizational confidence in the West. Mm-hmm. Karp talks a lot about the West. He says that Palantir stands for the West. Unlike other companies who work with anyone, we know who we are. Mm-hmm. And
what does he mean when he says the West? Because it is a fairly broad. Well, I mean, it's half the planet.
Yeah, exactly.
Technically.
Well, I think this is a really interesting question, and it's hard to say for sure. But one thing that I think really defines Karp is that he's Jewish, mm-hmm. and for him, standing with Israel is core to his beliefs.
Right.
So that's not exactly an uncontroversial position
not
in many
all.
parts of what we might call the West. Mm-hmm. So he has quite a strong idea of what the West is. And actually I've got the I printed out the manifesto because I knew I wouldn't remember it. But let me give you kind of one flavour of it, of the sort of things he's saying. He says, some cultures have produced vital advances, others remain dysfunctional and regressive. And even in the longer book, you never quite work out exactly which cultures he means and how to define them. To kind of put it in the most favourable light, he's saying that there are core Western values. Mm-hmm. We can name them. And that in the West, people should stand up for them.
Is this really a genuine, political philosophy? Or is it just an extremely convenient intellectual justification for governments in the West buying Palantir products?
I think the answer to that question is yes, because I think it's both.
Okay.
I think it's definitely genuine, because Karp has been saying this stuff for a long time. And also, he was saying it when it was incredibly unpopular. In fact, I think he said that one of Palantir's core advantages is that we walk towards government and towards the intelligence services and the Department of Defense when everyone else is walking away. So one of the things that Palantir's been kind of most involved with is this thing called Project Maven for the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, which is a military targeting system. Google signed a contract to do that and then pulled out because their workers protested. Apple also refused to be part of it, and many other Silicon Valley companies did. Palantir not only were part of it, they were enthusiastically part of it. However, I think it is true to say is that if you kind of read through this manifesto, it does seem as if the answer to all these problems is to buy more Palantir. Mm. So yeah, he's a salesperson too.
And it's not just simply limited to the DoD. Palantir has got involvement in immigration work in the United States in the form of ICE. The Pentagon, police forces are using its stuff in predictive terms. I mean, is there a pie that it doesn't have its fingers in?
You could say that about many companies, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, they've got a lot of private and public sector clients. But I think you're right to say is that in particular, Palantir is incredibly embedded in the US DoD and the intelligence services. Those two have that. Their capacities have grown together, hand in glove. And at Palantir's recent conference, one of the top figures from the DoD was there speaking, talking about their long-standing partnership and how they work together. And Palantir is right at the center of the United States kill chain, this kind of organizational, technological thing that they use to persecute war so effectively.
Well, that was just what I was going to come on to. I mean, Palantir aren't just involved with the defence industrial complex at its base, in terms of the production or in terms of data gathering. They're actually involved in active conflicts. Ukraine, Israel, I mean, both of them are using Palantir. Just explain.
Well, I'll tell you a bit more about what happens in the US, and
okay.
then I'll talk about how Ukraine and Israel, because I think it's really interesting. So in the US, the key thing about Palantir to understand is that they don't just knit the data together. They also give you software that can act on it. So they knit the data together, and then you can see it all through Palantir Maven Smart System, which is a system where which gives you all sorts of views of the battlefield. So you can look at it from the bird's eye view, the drone's eye view, the plane's eye view, and then you can go further into that data. And again, using Palantir software, do something like one-click execution of a missile. So Palantir will also give you artificial intelligence options generated by artificial intelligence. It will make suggestions saying, "Oh, you should do this."
So are we talking target selection?
Yes, exactly.
So literally, a machine has been contracted in to make, I'm going to say, some of the most fundamental decisions that members of the armed forces can ever make. Who to point their guns at?
Absolutely, and there are huge questions over how much control the humans have. So there are humans in the loop, clicking the button, but once the Palantir system has made a very strong recommendation, how can you refuse it?
Yeah.
And so, and I really cannot overstate the extent to which Palantir is embedded in the system. It is the core of the system. Everything else runs through it. The situation in Ukraine and Israel is slightly different. They both have systems that are very much like that. Mm-hmm. But as far as we can tell, Palantir feeds into those systems rather than being the core of them. In Ukraine, they have a system called Delta, which does something quite similar, and Palantir feeds into that. In Israel, they have a system, there's one system called Lavender, which also provides targeting and, again, does this kind of identification of targets and allows you to take actions on them very quickly. And, again, Palantir feeds into that. And I think it's kind of important to stress this because Ukraine and Israel are two of the most advanced countries in terms of technology in the world. Mm-hmm. And I find it very interesting that they've decided they want to use Palantir, but not make them the nervous system. They don't.
Why might they do that?
Dependency.
Yeah.
You can see why, from a national security point of view, the Israelis, who know tech better than anyone, would think, we're going to build this ourselves, thanks very much. We're going to own the nervous system. And yes, you can input into it, but we want to maintain control of that core section because it is so central to everything we do.
Isn't there also another interesting point when we're talking about both Israel and Ukraine? On the one hand, Palantir being celebrated for helping Ukraine resist the Russian invasion. On the other hand, Israel, frankly, the commentary has been rather more critical around the way in which they have used it.
Yeah, and I mean, if you speak to Palantir, they say, look, we just make tools. They say, we work with democracies, we work with Western countries, and we give them the tools. And we've got very strong lines. We will never work with, say, China, unlike other tech companies, which might do that.
Okay, let's talk about the United Kingdom, because what happens across the Atlantic eventually ends up over here. To what extent is Palantir being used in this country?
I mean, I should say Palantir have a lot of private sector clients, including this country. But just talk about the public sector ones. They have a large contract with the armed services. They've also been involved with the Met. There's been quite a bit of controversy over that, and I think it's sort of now proceeding, but in terms of in the form of a pilot project. But I suppose most specifically, and the biggest contract is with the NHS, where Palantir is organising this federated data platform, and where the aim is to bring together NHS data, which, as I'm sure you know, right, anyone who's used the NHS is well aware how fragmented it is.
Tell me about it.
And I guess a good example, and I've actually seen this inside Palantir. I've seen the system running in demo of an operating theatre. think of all the different types of data that I need to make that work correctly. You need the patient data, all the data about the staff that's being there, the timing and everything. I mean, I've like this. Would you be surprised to learn that this was being run by fax machines and pen and paper, or 17 different Excel sheets? No, not at all. Palantir say that by bringing that all together, they can make the whole system run much more effectively.
But what is the argument for using Palantir above other providers?
I think it's because of this thing that they're a one-stop shop. And I've spoken to so many people about this over the years, and I think in a way it all goes down to your estimation of what the NHS can do. So some people, they're really enthusiastic about Palantir, and they say it's so much better than what we had before. We'd never be able to manage that. Other people will say, oh no, it's so much worse than what we could do. There are all the amazing things we could do if we really ran this technology ourselves. And so you see how it often kind of comes down to this: do you really believe you can do it yourself? Or have you accepted that actually we need someone to come in and just take it over? And yeah, it won't be perfect, but at least they'll solve the problems.
But if the software works, if the NHS is in control of its data, there are contractual safeguards popped in at the very beginning, why is it the case we have doctors, campaigners, and two separate common select committees saying, yeah, we should be concerned about Palantir's involvement in the UK?
There are lots and lots and lots of criticisms of Palantir, but just to identify kind of two in particular. One is about the long-term value for money. Long-term, you have to think that these are such core systems that if you built them yourselves, you would have so much more control over them. And you would really be able to do what you want. And there is a very long history of governments having contracts with people and it turning into something that isn't quite right for their purposes. And I think people are very worried about that. And then I suppose that in a broader sense, there's this question of dependency. Right? And again, this goes back to Karp and all his statements. Is it really acceptable for a sovereign nation to have at the very core of its country, in its armed forces, in its health service, a company which, by its own admission, has very strong opinions about our politics?
How many times have I heard a big US-based tech company say, your data's safe in our hands? And at some point down the line, we all discovered it was being sold off to advertisers. It was being used by political parties. It was being used in a way that we were not told about when we signed up for that particular service. I mean, why should we not be worried that Palantir, with its fingers in all these pies around the world, it isn't going to do something like that?
Yeah, that's true. But on the other hand, how many times have you heard about NHS data leaks, where someone just basically decided that they would go in and take a look at a bunch of other people's data? That'd be much harder to happen with a proper data system, such as the one run by Palantir.
Another problem is, one government comes in and says, we want to use Palantir for these very clearly delineated sets of purposes. Another government comes in 5 years down the line, and they have the bare bones of the ultimate surveillance system at their fingertips, don't they?
There are two things there, right? One is about whether you can, about kind of the potential of these systems for surveillance. Like, yeah, I mean, welcome to the modern world. And I'm afraid to say this is the choice. You either have modern systems that use data and take all the advantages of that, or you have systems that don't really run properly. And then there's the separate question of whether data is being given to Palantir. And again, I would say that the data controllers of the hospitals, Palantir is processing the data. And, that's software. I mean, if you think about all the emails you send, that data is stored somewhere. It's extremely hard to create that certainty without actually getting in your own way.
We are becoming so used to big Silicon Valley figures espousing their own personal manifestos. The investor Peter Thiel, for one of them. Elon Musk never shuts up about what he thinks. And businesses and states have chosen not to do business with those two individuals on the basis of their political views. Should we be doing business with a guy who says the things he has in that manifesto in your lap?
Yeah, I mean, that's a question, isn't it? And the reverse of that question is that should we be deciding which companies we use based on their political views?
Yeah.
But here's the thing. Maybe I can frame it this way, right? Is that say you did decide to get Palantir out of the NHS. what would be the sensible thing to do from a technological perspective? Be to get another company, maybe a British company, to do exactly the same thing. And then you'd have all those same worries about surveillance, about data, but I guess they'd be our guys. Would you feel better about that? Like maybe a bit, but it definitely wouldn't make all the issues go away.
Certainly wouldn't. Rowland, always a pleasure chatting to you.
Oh,
Thanks very much.
welcome.
That's your lot for today, indeed for this week on This Is Why. Have a great weekend. We'll see you the other side.